Well, as I'm sure you have all heard by now, a massive decision came down from the Supreme Court, essentially ruling that affirmative action programs in universities are unconstitutional. Take a look at this from NPR News. The U.S. Supreme Court has found that Harvard and the University of North Carolina's admissions policy violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The decision reverses decades of precedent upheld over the years by narrow court majorities that included Republican-appointed justices. It could end the ability of colleges and universities, public and private, to do what most say they need to do: consider race as one of many factors in deciding which of the qualified applicants is to be admitted. And as was noted there, this has to do directly with North Carolina University and Harvard University, but will have notable and profound ramifications across the board with this ruling. Before I bring in Josiah and we discuss further, here is President Joe Biden delivering a speech responding to this.
We all know it. Discrimination still exists in America. Discrimination still exists in America. Discrimination still exists in America. Today's decision does not change that. It's a simple fact. If a student had to overcome adversity on their path to education, college should recognize and value that. Our nation's colleges and universities should be engines of expanding opportunity through upward mobility. But today, too often, that's not the case. Statistics, one statistic, students from the top 1% of family incomes in America are 77 times more likely to get into elite college than one from the bottom 20% of family incomes. 77% greater opportunity. Today, for too many schools, the only people who benefit from the system are the wealthy and the well-connected. The odds have been stacked against working people for much too long.
So, Josiah, obviously a huge decision. As it said, another example of precedent being overturned. And a lot of the arguments made for this ruling, in favor of this ruling, more commonly heard on the right wing, resonate with what I think a lot of people see on its face as a reasonable argument, which is, why should race be considered in an admission to a university? But what has to be considered is kind of the number one, righting of a wrong, attempting to address inequity, and walking into a situation where we don't live in as people wish that we did, and would be great if this were more so the case, and kind of this colorblind, race doesn't affect your life, your well-being, all of that, how you're treated type society. If we could get there, then programs like this would not be necessary. But the situation that certain communities have been put in then necessitates certain action. And I'm willing to admit a lot of programs aren't perfect, and there's a lot of arguments as to why they could be better or restructured, but something has to be done. And this is just taking away one of those tools to address inequality.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, obviously, as you said, like kind of with the Dobbs decision, which overturned federal protections for abortion rights last year, this is a major progressive cornerstone which has been overturned by the Supreme Court and has had decades upon decades of precedent. I don't know if it's to the extent of super precedent, but it had to be darn close. And to your point, look, I support affirmative action at the very least in principle, in large part because, as you say, we don't live in a colorblind or race-blind world. A lot of people pretend that we do, people who just quite bluntly are ignorant, or they have a conservative agenda when they say things like, well, we ended slavery, we ended Jim Crow, we ended redlining, we live in a colorblind or race-blind world. That's not true. We've actually seen many examples, like with respect to affirmative action, that if you have applicants, if you have competing applicants, those who have names that are considered more associated with the African-American community, we've seen situations where they are less likely to be admitted into college. We are still experiencing the lingering effects of slavery, of Jim Crow, of redlining. And so to your point, not only is there an inequity, but the government, the United States government, for decades, beginning with the founding of this country, helped create that iniquity, right? And so we have an obligation morally and practically as a form of redress to try to correct it. Now, other people will say, okay, listen, great in principle, but affirmative action has produced, according to multiple studies, mixed results. You can find studies that say it's highly efficacious. You can find studies which say it produces results that are less efficacious. But to your point too, if we get rid of affirmative action, what's going to take its place? Because we don't live in an egalitarian society. And even the president's own remarks, he didn't mention race directly, but he was talking about discrimination, and he cited discrimination based on income. If you live in, a great income bracket, if you're financially not just stable, but financially abundant, right? You are privileged in certain ways. You are advantaged in certain ways in terms of college admissions. So what we can't do, I guess, Luke, is what I'm trying to say. We can't turn and say, we have a flawed program. It's had mixed results. We're going to get rid of it and then do nothing in return. We can't let perfect become enemy of the good. We still have to attempt to do something. It's not enough to say you can't do this, and we just got to hope that we live in a race blind or color blind or income blind world, because we don't. So now the question is, okay, conservative Supreme Court, what will you allow us to do instead of affirmative action to help close these iniquities? And they don't have an answer.
And I agree with you. Let's move on to another clip here from these remarks from President Joe Biden.
Not going to let this break us. Thank you.
President Biden, the Congressional Black Caucus said the Supreme Court has thrown into question its own legitimacy. Is this a rogue court?
This is not a normal court.
Should there be term limits for the justices, sir?
So his response there is, it's not a normal court. I think that's fair. Definitely not a normal court at
Bit of an
all.
understatement.
Right. Sorry, I had your audio boosted way too much to the ears of our listeners. But quite the decision, and this specific court will have in history a whole lot of notable moments and notable stories and decisions that came of it. Thank you so much for watching. For the outro on this video, I want to plug Josiah's channel. Hit them with it, Josiah.
Hey, everybody. I appreciate you watching. You can find me at youtube.com/@ponderingpolitics. One word, pondering politics. If you like progressive commentary that focuses on coalition building with other elements of the left and calling the Republican Party out for what it's become, I hope you'll view my channel. Give me a like and subscribe and some feedback. Again, youtube.com/@ponderingpolitics. Thanks again.